Hello everyone, just a nice sort of quick tutorial today, or hopefully a quick tutorial today. On Facebook, somebody sent me a photo of a snake, and I've just sort of Googled the image here, and you can sort of see what's inspired this tutorial is this sort of this sheen that the snake has on its scales, that sort of almost sort of prismatic or rainbow sort of effect, which appears at the side of this snake as the surface is turning away from the from facing the camera. You can see that sort of mirrored sheen, and you can see it also in these other pictures as well, and this one particularly well. And so I started thinking about how I would get that effect on a material in ZBrush. So I decided that I would try and make one. So to start off with, I'm just going to start up a new document, make it 512 by 512, and I'm just going to turn on the grid, and that's with the control inverted commas. And I've got my grid set up to be in percentages. So if I just come up to grid, and actually it's under preferences and grid, which is off the screen for you, but that's what I clicked on. You can see that I actually changed my percentages, my grid lines to a percent rather than a pixel value. So no matter what size I open up, it will come in sort of dividing the document into eighths and then dividing each eighth into quarters. So with that, with the grid active, I'm just going to draw out a circle, and on a new layer I'm going to go to the gradient tool, and I'm going to pick this gradient here. This should be in your gradient presets that come with Photoshop. So I'm just going to click on that, and then make sure that we have it set to this radial gradient. I'll just switch off reverse, and we'll just have a look at how this looks. So if we drag this out, you can see that we get this sort of coloration. Now I don't want it to look quite this sort of rainbowy or sort of this fake looking. So what I'll do is I'll come back into here and I'll manipulate this slightly. So what I will do is I might switch it to a reverse on the gradient slider. So I'm just going to change that opacity to 100, and I will get those out the way, get these out the way as well. Okay, delete that and delete that. So here we go. Now I'll narrow this band here so that we get more of that sort of phasing from one color to the other, and I'll draw this down to here. Now with this opacity range, I'll just drag this a little bit closer to there, and we can just have a look at how that looks. So we'll click on OK, I'll hit reverse, and if we drag it out now, you can see that we have this sort of coloration. Now the banding is looking better, but the colors are still a bit sort of too bright for me. If you look at the original sort of pictures, you can see that there is that sort of quite subtle variation, and it almost ends in that sort of orange end of the spectrum, the red, is actually refracted so far that it would be around the back of the object. So what I'll do is I'll come back into here, and I'll actually change this to more of an orange color. So bring that up to there. Sort of an orange red, because we're not going to reach quite to that red. So we'll be fine with that, so that's okay. This yellow is a little saturated, so I'm just going to bring this down just a little bit to about that color. Likewise the green. Green's a little dark, but it's also a little saturated, so we'll desaturate and we'll brighten that up. The cyan is very saturated. It's very obviously sort of there. So that this color is sort of, it's a little dark and a little saturated. So I'll take that to that. And this color, this magenta, I don't want it to sort of be that sort of magenta. I want it more to be sort of like an indigo. And here we go. And that's alright. And let's see. Yeah. We want to make sure that we don't sort of have these bands be quite so obvious. So I'll just make sure that these sort of transition points are nice and even. So we'll go with that, and we will undo that gradient and draw out a new one. Have a look. And there, I'm liking that more. That's looking more like sort of the sort of refraction that you'd get if you looked through a sprinkler or a waterfall or something like that. So that orange might be a little bit saturated. So that's the only thing that I'm really going to change now. Let's just lighten that up a bit. Okay. And now, okay. So there we go. That's not too bad. Now I want this background. If I just deselect, I want this background to be black. So I will I'll go back to the paint bucket tool and fill that so that we have this sort of, and we don't really need the grid. So you can see that that's the sort of color that we're getting at the moment. And what I will do is go back to the gradient and this layer selected, just delete that, deselect. And now I'm just going to tighten this up a bit just so that it's closer to the edges. And this means that this is coming more into the sort of the visible opacity as well. So there we go. And now if we draw out from that, you can see that that is sort of closer to the edges. So that. And with our gradient, we'll draw that out. So yeah, I'm kind of happy with that. Now on a new layer, and I'll bring this under our refracted layer, I'm just going to go to a different gradient This one should be fine. And what I'll do is not quite center, up and to the left. Just drag out something like that. It's a little sort of not quite far enough. Something like that, to give us a sort of a sphere look there. And if I open up Navigator, you can see that that looks quite sort of spherical. It's not perfect, it's not an ideal representation of it, but it is sort of, it's close enough for us. So I'll just turn off my grid and my selection, and I will bring back this this layer here of refraction. I'm going to bring the opacity down, and I've still got that layer selected. So I'll bring down the opacity of that rainbow effect down to about 50. And we have this sort of look to it. What I might do is change it to an exclusion. And you can see that that refraction really comes out in the shadows. And just sort of go through all of the possible fill modes. And I'll just scroll with the mouse and just have a look at what we can come up with. You can come up with some quite dramatic looking effects. That's not too bad. Overlay is good, lighter color, dodge, screen, lighten. See, multiply is good if you want it to sort of really come out of the highlighted areas. But I'm going to go with exclusion. Okay, so now that we have this image, what I'm going to do is go to File, Save As, and I'm just going to save in the Z Textures folder in ZBrush, and I will save it simply as a JPEG. I'll call it Refractive 01 and save. Okay. Now if we come into ZBrush, and I'll open up Lightbox, and I might look for a tool that we can apply this to. Demo head's fine. So I'll just draw that out and go to edit mode. I'm just going to divide that up until we get to enough polygons that we can't see any of that faceting. That might be a little bit too heavy, so I'll actually step down one for now, and yeah, that should be fine. So there's our normal demo head, and we've got the red wax material on at the moment. If we come over to the material modifiers, you can see that our red wax is actually mainly the result of this sort of image here. If we click on this image, we can actually bring up a texture. So what I will do is I'll go back into Lightbox, I'll go to texture, and I will look for our refractive texture. A lot of images in here. I'm not sure if these are ones that I've downloaded or if they come with ZBrush. I think they all come with ZBrush, so what I'll do is I'll just really? about this? There we go. So load that texture in, and now if we go to red wax and select our refractive, you can see that we have changed our material to have this sort of rainbow effect around the edges like that. Now I recommend that you come in here and you play with these. Don't leave it at the default for red wax. One thing that I do like to play with, particularly when I do have this sort of radial texture on the sphere, is that if you go to these depth sliders, and you can actually crank this up and down, you can see how it affects this. And if you look in the actual material swatch, as you're sort of going backwards and forwards, you can see the sort of effect that you're going to get, and you can bring that around to the front a lot more, or you can push it right to the back like that, so it's just on the very edge of it. I like something close to, yeah, that looks good. And so there we go. That's how to create a texture with a sort of a rainbow or a refractive Fresnel effect using Photoshop and ZBrush.